Sophie sat in her small apartment in San Francisco, the warm scent of freshly brewed coffee drifting from the kitchen. At 28 she owned a tiny handmade furniture business, something she had built from scratch. But as she traced her fingers along the smooth edge of a newly finished table, her mind wandered back to a day that had left a permanent scar on her heart. The day she learned her own family had stolen $350,000 from her. It was a gift from her grandmother meant to help her future. She never imagined her parents and older brother would take it behind her back. Where are you watching from today? Kindly hit like, comment and subscribe to this channel for more. She remembered that moment vividly. What are you talking about? Sophie had asked, her voice trembling. On the other end of the line, her grandmother's voice was calm but cold. I gave you that money, Sophie, and they took it. Sophie sat frozen, gripping her phone as if it might shatter in her hand. The words didn't make sense. These were the people she trusted most. The people she thought would protect her. Now all she could think was why. She knew she had to uncover exactly how they had done it, and what her grandmother would do in response. Just 1 year before, Sophie's life had been nothing extraordinary. She worked as a sales representative for a wood products company in Seattle, making $70,000 a year. Day after day felt the same: wake up, go to work, come home, sleep. Her small, cramped apartment was barely furnished, and most of what she owned had come from second-hand shops. Sometimes she would catch herself staring out the window whispering, "One day I'll start my own workshop." But deep down she doubted it would ever happen. Then on her grandmother's 80th birthday, everything changed. Her grandmother, Grace, was a strong, elegant woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing. That day Grace handed Sophie a gift that nearly took her breath away: $1.6 million. Use it to build the life you've always dreamed of, Grace had said with a smile. That money allowed Sophie to leave Seattle, return to San Francisco, and open the furniture business she had been imagining for years. Every time Sophie looked at her workshop, she thought of her grandmother's kindness, until she learned the truth about the missing $350,000. What shocked Sophie the most was that she might never have discovered the theft if her parents hadn't gotten greedy. Their lies and selfishness were the very reason her grandmother dug deeper. And yet, even a year later, the betrayal still felt fresh. She could still hear the voices, see the expressions, and feel the heavy silence of that day. It all began with a strange phone call from her mother, 2 days before her grandmother's birthday, that Sophie would never forget. It was a rainy Tuesday evening in Seattle when Sophie's phone lit up with her mother's name. She had just sunk into her worn-out couch after a long day at work. "Hi, Mom," she answered, smiling softly. Her mother's tone was unusually cheerful at first, asking about Sophie's job, her health, and whether she had been eating properly. But then her voice shifted, slower, more deliberate. "Sweetheart, I wanted to tell you, Grandma's birthday party is cancelled this year." Sophie blinked, confused. "Cancelled? Why? She just called me last week to say I had to come." Her mother didn't hesitate. "There's a flu going around San Francisco. She doesn't want anyone getting sick, especially at her age." Sophie frowned. The explanation sounded logical, but something about the way her mother spoke felt rehearsed. Still, she didn't press it. "Oh, okay," she murmured, though her chest felt heavy with disappointment. That night, as she cooked herself a simple dinner, her phone buzzed again, this time with text messages from both her father, Mark, and her older brother, Daniel. "The party at Grandma's is cancelled. She's worried about the flu." They had written almost the exact same words. Sophie stared at the screen, a strange unease twisting in her stomach. "Weird," she muttered to herself. 3 people, 3 identical messages. Despite what they'd said, Sophie had already taken 3 days off work. She had bought her grandmother's gift, a navy cashmere scarf from Scotland that had cost her nearly $500, something she had saved up for little by little. She decided she would still fly to San Francisco, party or no party. "Even if it's just tea with her in the living room, I'll go," she thought. At the time, she had no idea this decision would drop her straight into the middle of a family scheme she never saw coming. 2 days later, Sophie's taxi pulled up in front of her grandmother's home. The evening sky was painted in warm orange and gold, and nearly a dozen cars lined the street. From inside she could hear laughter, music, and the faint clink of glasses. Her heart skipped. "Cancelled party?" She stepped through the gate, clutching the gift bag in her hand. Just then her cousin Mia spotted her through the window and shouted, "Oh my God, Sophie's here." In an instant people turned toward the door, their faces more startled than happy. Before Sophie could take another step, her mother rushed out of the house, her heels clicking against the stone path. "Sophie, you're here," she said loudly, almost too loudly, grabbing Sophie's hand. Her father was right behind her, smiling stiffly. The whole scene felt off. Her mother never spoke that loudly and her father's smile didn't reach his eyes. As her mother hugged her tightly, she leaned in and whispered quickly, "Sweetheart, I'm sorry. Grandma changed her mind and decided to have the party after all. Please don't be upset." Sophie pulled back slightly to look at her, but before she could say anything, her father cut in with a nervous laugh. Yes, it was all last minute. We forgot to tell you. Lucky you still came." Sophie's brows furrowed. Something about their rushed explanations didn't sit right. But instead of questioning them on the spot, she gave a small nod. "It's fine," she said quietly. Still, she noticed the tension in her mother's eyes and the way her father kept glancing toward the house as if worried about something. Inside the doorway stood her grandmother, Grace, her silver hair neatly pinned back, wearing a cream cardigan. When she saw Sophie, her face lit up. "You're here, my dear. I'm so happy. I thought you wouldn't be able to make it." Sophie smiled warmly and hugged her. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," she replied. Sophie handed her the navy cashmere scarf, neatly folded inside a gift box. Grace's eyes sparkled as she lifted it out and ran her fingers over the soft fabric. "Oh, this is beautiful, Sophie," she said, slipping it around her neck. "I'll wear it tonight." Sophie's heart warmed. At least this part of the day felt genuine. They walked into the dining room together, the smell of pasta and fresh bread filling the air. The long table was surrounded by relatives chatting and laughing. Sophie's mother guided her firmly toward a chair in the middle, right between her and her father. "I want you close to me," her mother said with a smile, but it felt more like a strategic move than affection. As Sophie settled in, her older brother Daniel was asked to move to another seat. He did so reluctantly, shooting her a quick glance that she couldn't read. On her right, her uncle Paul poured her a glass of red wine and asked about her life in Seattle. Sophie answered politely, but her mind kept replaying the strange events of the past 2 days. She noticed how her parents kept jumping into her conversations, sometimes answering for her, other times cutting her off mid-sentence. At first she thought they were just being protective. But the more it happened, the more it felt like they were afraid she might say something they didn't want others to hear. For a moment, Sophie let herself relax. The sound of clinking glasses, the hum of chatter, and her grandmother's laughter eased her nerves. She reminded herself she was here for Grace, not for anyone else. Watching her grandmother's eyes sparkle as she greeted each guest made Sophie glad she had come despite the so-called cancellation. But the calm didn't last long. After dinner, when dessert was served, her uncle lowered the music so Grace could speak. "I want to ask each of you something," Grace said kindly. She turned first to Sophie's cousin Mia. "What did you do with the money I gave you last Christmas?" Sophie tilted her head, curious. She didn't know her grandmother had given anyone money last year. Mia smiled shyly and said, "I haven't touched it yet, Grandma. It's still in my savings account." Grace nodded in approval. "That's good. You're wise to save." Sophie's curiosity deepened. How much money had her grandmother given out? And why had she never heard about it? Then Grace turned to Daniel. "And you, Daniel? What did you do with your share?" Sophie's head snapped toward her brother. "Sure." Her chest tightened. Daniel grinned proudly. "I invested it in stocks. Already made a 20% profit." Grace's face lit up. "Well done, Daniel. You've got a good head for business." Sophie tried to hide the sting in her heart. She didn't resent her brother or cousin for receiving money, but she couldn't help wondering why she hadn't been included. Did Grandma think I didn't need help? She thought. She forced a small smile and sipped her wine, trying to mask the growing knot in her stomach. And then it happened. Grace turned to Sophie, her expression soft but direct. "Sophie, what did you do with the $350,000 I gave you?" Sophie froze, her glass halfway to her lips. The words didn't make sense. I'm sorry, what?" Her grandmother's brow furrowed slightly. "The $350,000 I gave you at Christmas. What did you do with it?" Sophie's heart began to race. She opened her mouth to explain she had never received such a gift, when she suddenly felt her mother's hand grip hers under the table. It was a hard, almost painful squeeze. Startled, Sophie glanced at her mother. Her mother's face was pale, a tight smile plastered across it. "She hasn't used it yet, Mom," she said quickly, answering in Sophie's place. Sophie blinked in shock. The way her mother said it, calm, practiced, sent alarm bells ringing in her head. Grace's warm expression shifted into something sharper. "I'm asking Sophie, not you," she said firmly. The table went silent. Sophie's mother lowered her gaze, her hand trembling in Sophie's. Sophie slowly pulled her hand free, her pulse pounding in her ears. "I've never received that money," Sophie said, her voice steady but cold. "I didn't even know about it until now." A ripple of whispers spread across the table. Grace's eyes widened, her lips tightening as the truth sank in. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. Grace turned sharply toward Sophie's parents. "Mark, what did you do with Sophie's money?" The question landed like a hammer. Sophie's father's face went pale, and her mother covered her mouth with her hand, tears pooling in her eyes. Neither spoke. Grace's voice rose, sharper than Sophie had ever heard it. "Paul, call the police." Her uncle looked stunned. "Are you serious?" he asked. Grace didn't hesitate. "Yes. Right now." Sophie's parents shot up from their seats, voices trembling, begging her grandmother to stop. But Grace's jaw was set like stone. Her father dropped to his knees beside Grace's chair. "Mom, please," he begged, his voice cracking. "We'll return the money. Just don't do this." Her mother joined him, clutching Grace's hand, tears streaming down her face. "It was a mistake," she whispered. Grace's voice was unyielding. "The one thing I cannot forgive is theft, especially from family." She turned her gaze to Sophie's father again. "You didn't just take money. You stole her trust." Her father's expression hardened suddenly. "I didn't steal it. I borrowed it," he said sharply. Sophie's jaw dropped. "Borrowed? Without telling me?" Grace slammed her hand against the table, making the plates rattle. "Borrowed? She didn't even know it existed. You planned to keep it until I asked tonight, didn't you?" Her Uncle Paul's voice cut through the silence. "Mark, stop lying. Everyone here can see what you did was wrong." Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding eye contact with Sophie entirely. 20 minutes later, 2 police officers stepped into the dining room. The guests parted silently to let them through. Grace explained the situation in a calm, steady voice, while Sophie sat motionless, trying to process that this was really happening at her grandmother's birthday party. At the station, the truth spilled out. Last Christmas, Grace had given $350,000 each to Sophie, Mia, and Daniel. Since Sophie hadn't come home that year, she told Sophie's parents she'd transfer the money later. They had given her a bank account number, one Sophie had once shared with her mother in an emergency years ago, and Grace believed it was Sophie's main account. The money went straight into that account. But Sophie's parents had full access. Without telling her, they transferred all of it to Daniel, who put it into a risky stock investment he was convinced would triple in value. Within months, the stock had collapsed, leaving only $35,000 of the original amount. When Sophie heard the details, her stomach churned. She looked at her brother. "You knew this was my money," she said quietly. Daniel couldn't meet her eyes. "I thought I could make it more for you," he mumbled, but the guilt in his voice was thinly disguised. Grace sat in the station's waiting area, her hands folded tightly in her lap. When Sophie returned from giving her statement, Grace took her hand and squeezed it. "They lied to both of us," she said softly, "and I will make sure they face the consequences." That night, after they returned home, Sophie's grandmother called the family together again, this time in her living room with a lawyer seated beside her. The atmosphere was heavy, the only sound the quiet hum of the ceiling fan. Sophie's parents and Daniel sat on the couch, pale and silent, knowing what was coming next. The lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in a navy suit, opened her briefcase and laid out several documents on the coffee table. Grace's voice was steady. "I am changing my will," she announced. "From this moment on, Sophie will receive your shares of my estate. You are removed." Her father's head dropped into his hands. "Mom, please, we're family." Grace's eyes stayed cold. Family does not steal from each other and lie about it. Her mother began to sob, but Grace didn't waver. The lawyer continued reading. Grace had decided that Sophie and her Uncle Paul's family would split the remaining assets after her passing, including the farm, the house, and other investments. Based on current value, Sophie would inherit at least $3 million. Daniel's face went pale. He looked like he wanted to argue, but no words came out. Sophie glanced at him, a swirl of anger and sadness rising in her chest. She didn't want his downfall, but she couldn't forget the betrayal. Grace's tone hardened. You have 30 days to repay the $350,000 you took from Sophie. Every cent. Sophie's father's head jerked up. 30 days? That's impossible. The lawyer's reply was calm but cutting. Then we will pursue legal action. The weight of those words settled over the room. Sophie's mother clutched her husband's arm, whispering frantically, "We'll lose everything." Grace didn't flinch. "You've already lost my trust. The rest is your doing." After the lawyer left, the room stayed silent for several minutes. No one looked at Sophie. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, feeling a strange mix of vindication and grief. This wasn't how she ever imagined justice would feel. Uncle Paul stood and patted Sophie on the shoulder. "You did nothing wrong. Remember that." His voice carried both reassurance and quiet anger toward her parents. Sophie nodded, grateful for his presence. Later that night, her parents cornered her in the hallway. "We were trying to help you," her father said, his voice low but urgent. Sophie shook her head. "Help me? By stealing from me?" Her voice cracked and she stepped back before they could say more. That night, Sophie lay in bed at her grandmother's house, staring at the ceiling. The numbers, the lies, and the cold expressions kept replaying in her mind. 30 days. That was all they had to make it right, or lose everything they still had left. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew one thing. Her family would never be the same again. The following week, Sophie's parents put their San Francisco home on the market. It was the house Sophie had grown up in, filled with childhood memories, but now it was just a property they were desperate to sell. The asking price was well below market value. They needed cash fast. Daniel moved back in with them temporarily, helping pack boxes in tense silence. Whenever Sophie visited to pick up her belongings stored there, no one spoke much. The air between them was heavy, and every glance carried the weight of unspoken words. 3 weeks later, the house was sold. The buyers wasted no time moving in, and Sophie's parents handed over the keys with hollow expressions. The sale gave them just enough to pay Sophie the $350,000 plus $35,000 in interest that Grace's lawyer had demanded for withholding her money. When the funds hit Sophie's account, she felt no joy, only closure. The money was rightfully hers, but it didn't repair the damage done. "This isn't about the cash anymore," she told Grace over dinner one evening. "It's about what they chose to do." A month later, Grace made another big decision. She sold the last portion of the family farm for $2.4 million, splitting it evenly between Sophie and Uncle Paul's family. Sophie's share, $1.2 million, was more than she had ever imagined owning in her lifetime. With the combined funds, Sophie expanded her workshop into a larger space in San Francisco's industrial district. She invested in high-end woodworking equipment, hired skilled carpenters, and created a brand focused on craftsmanship and timeless design. Within a year, her business was thriving. She landed contracts with boutique hotels, luxury home designers, and private collectors. "Grandma's gift didn't just change my life," she told a friend one afternoon. "It gave me the means to create something that will last." Her parents, now living in a small rental in Oregon, kept their distance. The calls became fewer, the conversations shorter. Daniel had taken a modest job and seemed to avoid contact altogether. Sophie no longer felt anger, just a quiet acceptance that some bonds couldn't be repaired. Life was smaller now in terms of family gatherings, but warmer. Evenings at Grace's house with Uncle Paul, Aunt Linda, and Mia were filled with laughter, home-cooked meals, and sincerity. Sophie realized she'd rather have a handful of honest people in her life than a house full of liars. One night, as they sat together over tea, Grace squeezed Sophie's hand and said, "Money can be replaced. Trust can't." Sophie nodded, knowing it was true. She had lost a family she thought she knew, but gained a future built on integrity, hard work, and love that was real. Moral lesson: betrayal from loved ones is painful, but protecting your dignity and standing for the truth is worth more than any amount of money. Trust, once broken, is almost impossible to rebuild. So choose honesty over greed no matter the temptation. Remember to hit the like button, comment and subscribe to this channel for more of this.